So today I'm returning to White Forest, and I want to give my take on White Forest Azamina Pure for the Rage of the Abyss format. Now, the context for this is that there are a few major driving forces in the meta right now. The Mulch armies, mainly Fuelos, but still both Mulch armies, and for us, we seriously lose to Perulia, so we care about both of those cards very much. D-Shifter, we care about that very much, and Droll and Lockbird is probably less relevant than those cards, debatably in the meta, but we still care about that card a lot. So what can we do if we are trying to play into this type of meta right now? So I want to talk about some of the matchups, the matchup spread, what types of things are good or bad against certain decks, and why I'm choosing to run Power Spell here and not run the Fiendsmith cards right now. If you're new to my channel, I try to have a more creative take on a lot of decks. I mostly focus on White Forest and Azamina type decks, but I always have a competitive angle here and try to make the decks as good as possible. If you have any feedback or things that you think are not efficient or wrong, please point them out in the comments. That's usually very helpful for everyone. And if you want to join the Discord, the link will be in the description. People talk a lot about deck theory there and deck builds and give feedback and stuff. So, okay, to get into the video, let me explain the choices here. So first of all, why am I on Power Spell? I think that if your deck doesn't have in-engine ways to play around the broken ubiquitous non-engine cards like the Charmies, Shifter, and Droll, you must have a non-engine way to play around those things. So Thrust, accessing a turn skip like D-Barrier. There are other things that you could consider like DDG, but we don't play around DDG, so you don't really want to have to turn skip them and then give yourself zero chance of playing on their turn. There are also cards like Daruma, but I feel like the Dimensional Barrier is probably more generic than this, but you could also consider this card. So triple Thrust with, unfortunately, a main deck trap card to play around those broken cards, I think you have to do. There are some other awkward ways to play around some of those cards. So for example, if you hard draw Rusia, your chance of surviving a Shifter or a Droll is dramatically higher. For example, if you've hard drawn a Rusia and you have access to any other level 4, you can make a Rafflesia, and then when they Droll you, when you search after that, then you can send Gravediggers and negate the Droll. The problem with this is that there's a 33% chance of drawing Droll, and if you assume that you can only play around it if you've drawn Rusia, and you play 3 Rusia, you multiply those two probabilities, and you get like a 10 or 11% chance of them drawing Droll and you having access to a Rafflesia line before having searched anything. It's not worth affecting your main deck ratios for these niche types of situations. This is one of those issues that a lot of new players struggle with. You need to build your deck for your statistically normal hands. However, I will say that playing more Rusia and even maybe more Sylvie, there is a good argument for that if you get shifted, because nothing stops you from searching. Like for example, if they Shifter in the standby and you don't have access to Thrust for the turn skip, or maybe you do, you Sylvie and you search Tails, and Tails searches the Rusia, and then you basically just make a Baguska and you pray. Obviously, this is not good because this loses to like a single Imperm or whatever. But there aren't really very good plays around those types of broken cards. So I do think that maining Thrust and a turn skip card, you just have to do it. There's really, that's my opinion, at least for right now. In terms of the main deck stuff, interactions, so the Wanted package, or the Azamina package in this case, works very, very well with the toy cards, and that's why I think that you should also be playing Reinforcement of the Army. There are other engines that are very, very good in White Forest, like the Millennium stuff. Even if you only played 3 Sengenjin and literally nothing else, it is still another card. So actually, let me just bring this up. So the Sengenjin, so this card can be a spell if you need it to be a spell, because it can place itself in the spell and trap zone as a face-up continuous spell. It can special summon itself by paying 2,000 life points, and you can also add another Millennium monster, including itself, from your deck to your hand. Now, if you were to play 3 Sengenjin, just for example, or even 2, then searching another one is relevant because it gives you a free discard for Witch or a free tribute for Deception. That is a very big deal in a deck that plays a huge package like this, and especially in a deck that is a multi-card combo deck that cares a lot about its resources and doesn't just want to give stuff up to tribute off of Deception or to send off of Witch. So this is a major consideration, and I think if you were playing this, especially if you're playing 3 of it, I don't think the other cards are really good enough to warrant fitting into the deck, but this card in particular, then I think that you should probably play a Centurion Legatia, and probably the easiest card to cut would be Rafflesia. So you play the Legatia for a 12 because this is an 8, and an 8 and a 4 is a 12. I think that that is a solid thing to do. You get a draw and a pop. Other things that are debatably flex, so I do think that you need 2 Synchro 10s in here, especially in the purish version. So Chaos Angel is one of the best generic ones, and in my opinion, you must play Chaos Angel. Most other people will play a Satellite Warrior in the second Synchro 10 spot. I think it's also fine to play 2 Chaos Angels, because sometimes you can only get a double light, and then if you have a little bit more time, sometimes you can get a light and dark Chaos Angel. That will typically happen if you use the Murcielago as the dark 6, and the Sol as the dark 6. This does come up very often, so I think the 2 Chaos Angels is totally defensible. The Sinister Sovereign is a flex spot in the sense that it should be a Synchro 10, but it could be another Synchro 10. The thing is that this card gives you a huge amount of flexibility that you don't otherwise have in a simplified game state or close to a simplified game state. So if you have been playing and maybe you've gone through a few interactions like Silvera or whatever, and your opponent only has a couple cards left, this is 2 interactions. This can be basically a blowout. Let's say, for example, you're against like a Kashtira or someone who's playing a Kashtira package, and they try to use Birth, and you banish the Birth and burn them for 12. That's a very big deal. The problem with this, and the reason why I say it's not mandatory, is if it's not guaranteed, or you think that it's not likely that you will enter many simplified or close to simplified game states, then it's very hard to justify making this card off of something like a Chaos Angel. I'm also playing the Berserker. I still think that this card is very, very useful in a purish version, partly because it helps you OTK in a deck that doesn't necessarily OTK very easily. Obviously, you have stuff like the Silvera, which give you piercing, well, double piercing for spellcasters, spellcaster synchro monsters. But this is a little bit specific because you have to have booked them in that turn, or their monsters had to have already been in defense position, and then this only works with your spellcaster synchro. So you'd have to have like a Silvera and like a Diabel. That's probably the most realistic combination of cards, and then double piercing with both of those. So I feel like this just helps with OTKing, and it's also a generic Synchro 8. So there are some cases where you don't want to make a rank 4, like let's say pre-siding, you don't have a Rafflesia target if you're playing Rafflesia, or you don't want to make Baguska because you think that you have like monsters on field whose effects you want to be able to use, and you want to go into Synchro 8. I think this is a solid choice. So if you are playing this, it means that this is the non-tuner worm that this requires, and the tuner can be anything, which will be your Zapper Shrimp. A couple other specific choices I've made here. Eradicator Epidemic Virus. You can tribute the Draco Berserker because it is a dark monster that has more than 2500 attack, or 25 or more attack. So I feel like this could be a blowout against certain decks, and if you're already on Thrust, you might as well side one of them. And for the siding patterns, the Droplet is not efficient compared to other cards you could have in. So they're basically 3 cards that you can always side out going first, and then debatably there are like 3-ish other cards you could also side out going first. So having 3 cards like the Time Space, the Gravediggers, if you are playing Rafflesia, or other targets for Thrust, I feel like those are good. Usually if you're going first, you want to put in the Scourge, and so Scourge should also usually go in. The Debtors, I'm undecided on. This is a card that I think is undervalued in terms of, for example, bringing out a Sol on your opponent's turn to get an out-of-turn pop, which is almost as good as Chaos Angel, or as good as Chaos Angel in some cases. But I feel like I don't really want to main this in a deck that has to play this, which is a brick. If you do draw it in combination with something you can send like Wanted, or your Witch to search for Wanted, or Deception or whatever, obviously you still can use it, but usually want to search this instead of drawing it. So this card feels kind of bad to draw. And then the Azirune, if you're going second, is a brick, and if you're going first, you'd still rather search it off of the Rabbit. So I feel like putting another card that you would rather search and not draw just doesn't make sense in a multi-card combo deck. I am doubling down on the toy package, which is why Rota isn't here. And then one other thing before I just show you like a basic template combo is that I think that this is still a super underrated combo, the Nib Veiler Search, that for some reason every single time I show this in a video, people always say that this is not worth it. There are like no other decks that can reliably search this every single turn. You search the Nib off of the Granite, and you search the Veiler off of the Arciela. And this is extremely difficult for most decks to play around. So if you can do this, why not? The Nib does not conflict with the Droplet, because if they Ilia Sylvia it stays in your hand and you keep the resource, just like whatever else you were going to send for it. If the Nib does resolve, you still keep the resource and you can send it off a Droplet. The Veiler is the only thing that conflicts with the ethos of the Power Spell version, where you do lose the resource and it's not high impact, but it can still be very useful against, for example, a Silhouette Rabbit, if you've drawn access to your Azamina stuff and you feel like you need that to resolve, and so you can't play through an Azurune, or it would be hard to, or stuff like if they sequence to make Desiree, then you can Valor that. So the Valor is still useful. It's just doesn't really fit with the power spell idea here. But the main thing to note is really just that you need something to not immediately lose if you get hit by a Charmy or a Shifter or a Droll, and I feel like that requires a Thrust package. Okay, so now let me show you a sample cookie cutter kind of replay. So this is basically like what happens if you draw the wanted engine. What type of board are you trying to get to? Like, why would you even be playing the Azamina stuff to begin with? Because I'm playing Sol, I'm playing Murcielago, and Ilia Sylvia. 3 cards. That's really like a lot. Most decks that play it don't play those. So let's take a very, very typical scenario. You've drawn access to a toy card. Here, this is the Soldier. So this is not the best case, not the worst case, because if it was best case, we would have Box. Worst case, we would have Tank. And we send that for the Witch. And that allows us to chain block also. Obviously, it doesn't beat Imperm or Valor, but still. So the Witch will give us the Deception here, and the Soldier can give us the Box. So here we have summoned twice. So we summon the Witch, and then we summon the Soldier. Those are 2 summons. We've set Deception. So here we activate we can activate the Box. I'm just placing it because that's search. This is already known knowledge. And here we have the Deception. So without using any of the other cards in our hand, I guess that would include the Box, you can Deception and tribute, for example, the Witch. Now you've searched the Hallowed Azamina. So now here you may be thinking, well, why play the Murcielago in this deck? It's not like we have original Sinful Spoils to search or something like that. Because right here, you could just activate Hallowed, you could send Deception, and you could make Ilia Sylvia, and then you'd have your negate on summon 3, and you can continue playing. You haven't even, used your White Forest engine. And in this case, you haven't even used Box either. But what you can do is you can make the Murcielago. So the Murcielago will search, for example, a Wanted. Okay, so what's important to note here is if you've started with Witch and not Wanted, obviously that's worse than starting with Wanted, because Wanted is what gives you a draw. If you search the Wanted, this means 2 things. 1, you can get the draw off of Wanted, but 2, you have another spell to discard off of another card in your hand, depending on how you want to play this out. So if you were stuck and you had nothing else to do, you might need a spell to send off of like an LZ or whatever. But there's also another use for that. So here we are on summon 3, because remember we went the Witch first, we brought out the Soldier, that was 2, and now we've activated or summoned the Murcielago, which is 3. So if here we go into a generic Link monster, so this could be a Masquerena, for example, but Rabbit I feel like is the most generic and useful. It is also an illusion, which will turn on your Tales of the White Forest. This is probably not something your opponent will expect if they don't know how the deck works, and in some situations this can be very, very important, because you may lose the entire game if you don't have access to this. Also remember, this can be a low resource type play, where let's say the only card in your hand was a Tails, and you had nothing else to send if you were to search something off Tails. So let's say you want to Tails search the LZ, but you don't have a Spell or Trap to send. So you would Rabbit, you would set the Azurune or the Silhouettrix, so now you have a Spell or Trap to send, and then you would Tails, because this is an illusion, you would search an LZ, you'd send the Azurune, and you can play from there. So this does have like a lot of applications. It is generically useful in almost every hand, and also has niche applications. Okay, so we've gone Witch is 1, Soldier is 2, Murcielago is 3, Rabbit is 4. Now, remember that we have the Wanted here in our hand. So now that we have Murcielago in the grave, we can use Hallowed Azamina, shuffle back the Murcielago, add Hallowed to hand. And so here, we can activate the Hallowed, we can chain the Wanted if we want. We don't have to. And we can make Ilia Sylvia. So, if you really needed the Wanted as something to have as a discard, then you'd have to probably just make the Ilia Sylvia immediately instead of the Murcielago, but making the Murcielago first just gives you an extra body, so your plays are better, and you get the Ilia Sylvia on summon number 5. So this does play around Nib. So this is basically the end of like what I'm showing for the combo, because I'm not trying to show you combos you've seen a million times. I just want to show you that it's very realistic if you draw the Wanted package, so Wanted or Witch, that access to, for example, any part of the toy engine basically sets up exactly this board, and then you're going to have 3 or 4 cards in hand. The only thing I guess that really you should pay attention to with the Wanted draw is you have to think about whether it's worth it so this says, during your main phase you can banish this card from your graveyard, target one of your Sinful Spoils spells or traps that is banished or in your graveyard, place it on the bottom of the deck, then draw a card. So your only target is going to be the Deception. If you put the Deception on the bottom of your deck to draw a card, it means that the Deception is not going to reset itself in the end phase. Now, this might not matter if you are not playing Debtors. Normally, if you're playing Debtors, you want the Deception to reset itself in the end phase as part of your combo because you have searched or drawn Debtors and you're going to Sol out of turn. It could also be important if you don't need a draw and you would rather attempt to repeat Hallowed on the next turn. So if this resets itself in the end phase, and let's say you use your Ilia Sylvia in their turn and you don't lose, and now it comes around to you, the Ilia Sylvia will be in the grave, so you can again Hallowed, put back Ilia Sylvia to add this to your hand, and then you can flip face up your Deception. You always want to do that so it'll always reset itself, because it only resets itself if it was sent while it was face up. And then you can immediately start your turn by bringing out another Ilia Sylvia, or a Sol, because this now would be turn 3, so Sol would be more relevant. So that's worth consideration. You don't always want to use the draw. And then you would just continue with whatever your plays were from here. You also, in this case, haven't even used the box yet. So I think that that's a very, very realistic type of board to go for. And I'm not like 100% set on exactly the power spells here. Super Poly is something that I was thinking about, but it requires more slots in the extra deck, and I'd really only be willing to give up the Rafflesia, but I feel like you need at least 2 spots, the Mud Dragon and the Garura, to justify playing Super Poly. Also, discarding a card in a deck that already has to discard stuff or tribute stuff is slightly less attractive, so I feel like Super Poly might not be the option here, but I do think Eclipse could be good. So if you have any suggestions, let me know. This is not really a true side deck. It's more just showing what siding patterns could look like, but you definitely do need the Scourge. If you are playing the Berserker, I would definitely play Eradicator if you're on Thrust. And if you're on Rafflesia, I would definitely play 2 targets. You can Thrust for this, remember, you don't just have to Rafflesia it. So that's basically all for this video. I will post some gameplay with this soon, and I may cover some other variants of White Forest and Rage of the Abyss format. So thanks for watching.